Hey Internet, and welcome back to No Meta, Just Vibes, the MMO show for the filthiest of filthy casuals, and today we're talking about Final Fantasy XIV. I have a bit of history with the game, as you could see from my channel. I've made a couple of videos on it before that were more like narrative style videos, but today I'm going to be talking about the game itself. And I've been playing Final Fantasy XIV since the beginning. I played the, I think, alpha, but it definitely beta of 1.0, and I played that up to the end of it. I actually really liked 1.0. Objectively, it had a lot of issues. I don't think it would have been successful. It was objectively unfinished. It was not ready to be released where it was. Like, I can tell you from the beta to the full game, like very little changed. But I actually really liked it. I thought the vibe was really good. I thought it had some interesting ideas of how to do a modern non-World of Warcraft style MMO. And as a Final Fantasy XI player, that's probably my favorite MMO of all time. It was one of the last games that came out before WoW, so it has a lot of unique elements that I think 14 tried to iterate on, but just didn't know how to do it. This is besides the point, and maybe we can make another video about it. But the actual successor to Final Fantasy XI is Dragon Quest X. That game took everything that was good about that style of game and updated it in a way that feels really fun and fresh. And if it were to be released in English, it would definitely, I think, be my MMO of choice. I've played it a little bit with the translation that's available, but again, we can talk about that another time. So today we're talking about 14. And like I said, I've been playing 14 since the beginning. It's been my anchor MMO. So it's the MMO that I come back to all the time. Whatever other games I'm playing, whatever other things I do, I always come back and do the story content and kind of check out all the new stuff for the patches. If you look at the game, like, my hours played is probably very low compared to a lot of people. The amount of content that I've actually completed, besides like the story, is extremely low for anyone that's playing the game a lot. So I am definitely a casual. I don't do hardcore raids. I don't do savage or ultimates. I will go do things when they become a little easier and the initial kind of difficulty has worn off. But I think that that's a valuable perspective because I feel like most of the content creators that kind of have the voices for this game are kind of more in the high end content group. And that's not a bad thing at all. It's actually a good thing. That kind of content is important. It's the kind of content that people like to watch, right? Like, if you have the Race to World First for when they release a new Ultimate, I watch that. It's really fun. It's great for the community. I think like 1% of players actually complete that content, but for the community, it is really important. And it brings a lot of new people to the game. Even if they're not going to try that stuff, it is really good for it. So I'm not like an anti-try hard kind of person. It's just I'm a dumbass and I'm not good at mechanics, so I stay in my lane. But I do think that it is good to get that kind of viewpoint too. So let's talk about the state of the game, because I think it is at an interesting place where it is very popular. I mean, the game has grown a lot in the past few years. The past couple of expansions have been very good to it. And I think that's a testament to the hard work of the team. But right now, at the end of Endwalker, there is a lot of sentiment in the community, both with content creators and with, normal people, that the game is kind of hitting a wall. And that there is this kind of building resentment that I think gets misinterpreted a lot as people hating the game or just doomsaying. And I mean, if you've been in the World of Warcraft community, doomsaying has been there for many, many years. People have been saying the game is dead for a long time. But you could tell that the mood in that game shifted considerably during Shadowlands. Shadowlands was a breaking point for a lot of people. And I think that Dragonflight is a great expansion for the most part that has brought a lot of people back. And I think Endwalker is not at Shadowlands level, but there are a lot of aspects of the game that I think, 10 years into its operation, 12 if you count the original, people are starting to get kind of frustrated and kind of tired. And I think that the direction the game is going needs to change a little bit to kind of rebalance itself and kind of refine itself. And the fact that Dawn Trail is coming out, it's a good chance for them to do that. Yoshi P has kind of said things that could make you believe that 7.0 is almost going to feel like a new game. And, how much they're actually going to be able to do that, it's questionable. The older a game gets, the harder it is to meaningfully change the game at a base level. But I want to talk about some of the things that, for me at least, keep Final Fantasy XIV from being an elite game for me rather than just a game I really enjoy and have a lot of attachment to. I love the game. I think it's great. I play it for a reason. Like, there's plenty of games that I like that I don't play. There's plenty of games that I think would be really fun that I don't, find the time or the effort to. But Final Fantasy XIV is just a game I can always fall back on. It's always a game that I know I can play and go back and do some older content, check out some stuff that I haven't seen before, and I'm going to have a good time. So I don't want this to be interpreted as, doomsaying. Because I don't think the game is dead. I don't think the game is dying. But I think the direction of the game needs some work. And as a casual player, right? Not as someone who is gonna completely understand, what goes into high-end trading, but I do listen to the people who do that kind of stuff, and I hear the things that they're saying, and it echoes in a lot of ways things that I've been feeling. I think the combat in the game is really fun, but the way that the jobs have been balanced has gone in a direction that makes a lot of jobs not that fun to play. The one thing everybody talks about is homogenization, especially when it comes to tanks and healers. They've been kind of homogenized, so they all play very similarly to each other, and just the flavor is slightly different. And the reason for this, I think, on the developer side, is that one of the main pillars of Final Fantasy XIV is accessibility. It's meant to be easy to pick up and play. It's meant to be easy to learn. There's a lot of content that you can just go in and do pretty well in. And then there's the harder stuff if you want to get invested into that. And it informs a lot of the decisions that have been made. And I'm going to compare this to Final Fantasy XI again. Final Fantasy XI has a lot of classes, and the balance is very strange. There are a lot of different types of end game content in that game, as opposed to Final Fantasy XIV, where you have kind of 3 or 4 things that you're going to be your activity. You have your raids, your 24-man raids, your savages, your ultimates, EX. Like, Final Fantasy XI has a lot of different types of content that give different types of rewards, which is another thing we'll come back to in a bit. And some classes just do better in those than others, and it's kind of something that the game is made knowing that that's going to be the case. And like Final Fantasy XIV, you can make your character into whatever class you want. So I think the idea is, if you're playing the game long enough and you're invested in the end game, you're going to have a couple of different classes that you have geared up and that you're willing to take into content. And so you adjust your party composition based on that. Which happens too a little bit in 14, but it's definitely not at the same level. And on the one hand, it's good. It's good that all the classes are really balanced. On the other hand, it does take a lot of the mechanical complexity out of them. So for example, in 1.0, you had the elemental weaknesses that are in every RPG ever, certainly every Final Fantasy. Certain creatures were vulnerable to certain elements, and in that version of the game, Conjurer had all those elementals. They ended up getting split between Black and White Mage, Conjurer, and Thaumaturge. And in 2.0, they're taken out altogether. And the reasoning is very simple. If a boss is weak to a certain element, and only, let's say 2 or 3 classes have access to that element, then they become a requirement to do that content for most parties, right? It becomes the meta to bring that class, and they don't want that. They want every class to be able to clear every kind of content, and that's a good thing. On a base level, that idea is really good, but taking out that element of planning and having different strategies for different bosses homogenizes gameplay in a way that I think in the early stages of the game wasn't as apparent, but now is becoming more and more of an obstacle for people. And this goes for things like crowd control. There's no crowd control in this game. You used to have sleep. There used to be some abilities that would qualify as crowd control. If you don't know what crowd control is, it's basically in a lot of older school MMOs, AoEing things wasn't usually a good idea because individual enemies tend to be much more difficult than they are in modern MMOs. And so you would have usually like 1 or 2 members of the party would be in charge of crowd control, doing things that slow down or stop the other enemies from attacking. And maintaining this was a big part of multi-enemy battles. And this is another kind of philosophy of 14 that I think has been taken a little bit too far, which is that there's not a lot of management of things. You used to have to manage your enmity, both as a tank and a DPS. You had to make sure that you weren't pulling hate off of the tank and getting attacked. And healers too could do it really easily. Now it is basically impossible for you to pull hate off a tank unless you're doing something very wrong. And for a lot of people, that's desirable. It's just like, it's one less thing to worry about. But it also feels like, what's the point of enmity now? What is a tank really doing other than doing one attack that guarantees every enemy is going to hit them? In 11 or in other games, you used to have to sleep monsters or make sure that, they didn't use certain attacks. There was a lot of buffing your party and debuffing, but all of these things can't be an aspect of every class. So in 11, you have support classes like a Bard and a Corsair and Geomancer, whose purpose is to buff the party. And they have various buffs that can be used in various situations. Whether you need more accuracy, haste, MP regen, things that have to be managed in that game. Final Fantasy XIV, you don't really manage anything. You just kind of do your rotation. And if you do your rotation correctly, your class kind of just works. And other than that, unless something goes horribly wrong, that's kind of what you're doing. And I think to me, that's one of the tiring things about the game. The reason that I can't play it for, 6 hours on end, not that, you need to play a game for 6 hours, but I get a little tired of the game faster than I would of others because I'm doing the exact same thing in every battle. Every battle, I'm, using the same rotation and moving out of the way of mechanics. Because mechanics aren't in this game, they're not so much things that the boss does, they're things in the environment. So you end up with classes that have a lot of attack abilities that just kind of get played in order, and depending on the class, there might be some variation. Like Dancer, for example, I really enjoy because it has a proc system where certain skills enable certain other skills, and it's not 100% chance, so you do have to kind of pay attention and you hit different buttons based on what's going on. But a lot of classes in the game are just, you hit this sequence of buttons and that's kind of it. There's not any debuffing, there's not any, changing of how you do things depending on the enemy's strengths and weaknesses. And this makes the game insanely accessible. It's at its core, the idea is good. But I think that the more time goes on and the more they kind of push that, an unintended consequence is that battles become much simpler. And for bosses, mechanics have to be kind of the star of the show, because in pretty much every boss battle, you're doing the same thing with your buttons. You're pushing the same buttons in the same sequence, with some variations based on if the boss is untargetable or whatever the case may be. But most of what you're doing comes from the environment, comes from glowy spots on the floor, comes from tethers, comes from things like that. As opposed to, I think a lot of other MMOs have more of the boss itself doing things mechanically. And I can't tell you if having more class variety and skill variety is actually better, right? Because it's a trade-off. In Final Fantasy XI, you can have a harder time finding people to do content with if you're a class that isn't advantageous directly for that content. That game has a 6-person party. Final Fantasy XIV has a 4-person party by default, and then an 8-person for the larger one. It wasn't designed for a pure support class to take the role of a DPS. And the thing that they found is that, for example, Astrologian originally had a bunch of different things it could buff on the party. In 99% of situations in this game, the only thing you want to buff is damage, because it is a very damage-focused game. Healers need to do a lot of damage. In a lot of games, healers just kind of stand around and wait to do healing, and that's for me kind of more fun because it feels like the healing is the main point, but in Final Fantasy XIV, every class is a DPS who occasionally needs to do other stuff. Again, accessibility, it makes healing potentially a little easier to get into, but it's gotten to a point where most healers are bored out of their minds. They have 2 attack skills. One is a dot, and one is just a regular nuke spell. Then maybe they have 1 or 2 other damaging abilities that come up once in a while, but otherwise, their rotation as it is really boring. And there's not a lot of healing required necessarily, especially if you're in the high-end content. Every battle is choreographed very specifically so that when you get good at it, you don't have to heal as much. Your allies are going to avoid most of the damage. The tanks can like heal themselves a lot of the time. And so we have a situation where if you're a healer, you get punished for your group being really good by not having to heal and only pressing one button over and over and over. And you have a lot of different kinds of healing skills, which is cool. But they're all mostly off global cooldowns, because if you have to heal with a global cooldown, basic healing spell, that's a damage spell you're not doing. And it's not tuned to be, it's not meant to be doable without you contributing a lot of DPS. So we get into this situation where I think a lot of people are feeling bored with the class design. There's this 2-minute meta now where all party buffs and personal buffs kind of line up at the 2 or 1 minute mark, so that everyone kind of has the same burst phase. I get what the idea was there. I don't think that's been successful. I don't think pretty much anyone likes the 2-minute meta. It makes all the classes feel really similar. It gives having every class have the same burst window, it just doesn't feel good. I mean, they had to buff Paladin and change their gameplay a little bit because they were more of a sustain class where they did constant DPS, and it wasn't working within that meta, so they had to kind of put them into the 2-minute meta too. And I feel like maybe they're going to change it for some point. I don't know, but it seems to be an experiment that has really not worked out and has made all the classes feel very samey, and just the same thing in different fonts. And in a game where your job or your class is that important and that core to your gameplay, I think it's very important to make them feel different and to give people different things to do. Personally, I think rotations are boring. Obviously there are skills that are going to be better. There are skills that are going to work in a certain order, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But when the rotation is so rigid and it's 90% of what you do, you're not adjusting your skills to fight enemies. You're adjusting where you stand and how you remember mechanics. And personally, I don't remember mechanics. I can't remember mechanics to save my life. I'm a reactive person, not a proactive person. That's just how my brain works. And so naturally, I'm not a good fit for high-end content in Final Fantasy XIV, and that's fine. I don't think it needs to be accessible to literally everyone. But I think that from the people I follow that are doing that kind of content, it's starting to feel like if you know how to play your job and you can go where someone tells you to go, you can pretty much clear anything. It's not necessarily about how well you play your job. And, obviously there is a big difference between someone who has studied the job well, who has min-maxed the gear, who's, practiced their rotation over and over. They're obviously going to be a lot better at it than I am. But at the top level of play, every person who plays a class is probably doing the exact same thing. Whereas in a lot of other games, you have different builds that you can do. You have a lot more variation in the gear you can collect. Final Fantasy XIV has what's called vertical gear progression, where for the most part, the newest piece of gear, or one of the newest pieces of gear, is gonna be the best one for you. It's gonna have the best stat increases. Whereas a lot of other games have more horizontal progression, where different armor sets and different pieces give different bonuses. Sometimes they give a lot more specific bonuses. Games like World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XI have gear that improve a specific skill that you have, and that's really fun because maybe you need that skill more in one encounter than another, and so it gives you something to prioritize. It gives you something to go after. It gives you different paths to go down and different kinds of content to do. And I think the rigidity of how content is structured in Final Fantasy XIV right now makes it feel very unrewarding. Every patch, you're gonna do the dungeon, you're gonna go through the story, you're gonna do either the 4 raids of the 8-man raid or the 1 raid of the 24-man raid. You're gonna do whatever trial was introduced. There's gonna be an EX trial. Sometimes there's other kinds of content introduced. In Endwalker, there hasn't been a lot of that. They did Island Sanctuary, but there wasn't really new battle content. Actually, I'm sorry, they did Criterion dungeons, but the rewards for them were so bad that most people do it once and then never again. So really what you're doing is your roulettes, your dungeon roulettes, your alliance raid roulette. You're getting tomestones, you're buying gear, that's how you get more powerful. I think there needs to be a lot more variation in the kinds of content that you do in the game. And the reward shouldn't just be the same thing for everyone. It should be catered more towards either your play style or the kinds of encounters you're going for. And unfortunately, this does kind of unbalance things a little bit. And it opens things up in a way that I think it's easy to say all this. It's easy to say that all this is what should be done, but it's really hard to make. And I mean, you can look at any other MMO and the nightmares that they've had balancing jobs, and 14 has had that too. But I think overall, it has done a very good job of making a treadmill that you can run on with very little problem and get to where you need to go. Whereas a lot of other games have like a series of treadmills that take you to different places, some of which you need, some of which someone else needs, and they don't all always necessarily go to the same place. And that's much more confusing and much more difficult to design. But I think ultimately it's a lot more fun. And I think that in the wake of 1.0's failure, and it was, as much as I love the game, like I did really love it, but it was a failure and it needed to change. I think the way that they remade the game to follow in the World of Warcraft content model, to be more like the other MMOs that were out at the time, that was the right decision. The game needed money. It needed people to be subscribing to it. It operated for a long time without a subscription fee while they were kind of retooling it, while they were adding tons of content to 1.0 and making all the content for 2.0. They needed people to play the game. They needed to reach a wider audience. And this worked. It worked really well. I don't think literally anyone expected Final Fantasy XIV 2.0 to succeed the way that it did. And to get, 10 years and several expansions later, like that, it's an incredible job that they did. And I think that the things that were working for them in 2012, 2013, 2014 aren't working now. Their pipeline for content creation, for job balance, for the basic building blocks of the game, they're working, but they're kind of working at a low level. And I think that's where a lot of the frustration of players is coming from. It's not that they hate the game. They like the game. They want to play the game, but they want the game to kind of meet them halfway a little bit more than it does now. Final Fantasy XIV went from feeling very new and exciting and, something different and fun was always around the corner, to very predictable and rigid now. You know what you're getting in every patch, for the most part. You know exactly the kind of content you're going to get. You know exactly how you're going to approach it. You're going to spend a couple days on a really hard trial, figure out what the mechanics are, and then it becomes just something you do every week to keep your gear progressing. And what you're doing, the actual moment-to-moment gameplay, is becoming less and less interesting. I think the game needs to branch out a little more and to embrace some of the older school sensibilities while staying in that modern mindset, because it's a really hard sell to get someone to play, a World of Warcraft classic or a RuneScape or an EverQuest or Final Fantasy XI. Final Fantasy XI is an incredible game that is impossible to convince someone to play because it is so archaic. It has so many kinds of content, so many different avenues for you to pursue. mechanically, the classes are so robust and complex and have so many abilities, some of which have incredibly niche uses, that it's hard for someone to get into it casually, right? But it's very easy to get invested in Final Fantasy XIV, and I think that's the game's greatest strength. The game's greatest weakness for me right now is that it no longer feels creative or groundbreaking outside of its story, which I still think is really good. I think one of the things you'll find the least people complaining about in Final Fantasy XIV is the story. And I think that story is what keeps people invested, because I don't think right now that it's the gameplay as much. And, I want to see this game succeed. I want to see this game go for 20 years. I want to see it get the same kind of success that 11 had. I love the world of it. I love the ideas of a lot of the classes. But I think that right now, the game needs some significant changes in the approach of the developers to be a continued success. And I'm hoping with 7.0, that's what we're going to see. A week from when I'm recording this, we have the second Fan Fest. So, we might get some new information there. But I think that the reason people are frustrated with this game right now isn't because it's bad. Isn't because they're tired of it. It's not always because they want to get views on YouTube, although, that's always going to be a factor, right? Content creators need to get views. World of Warcraft content creators have been saying the game is failing for years for content. And some of them mean it and some of them don't. And it's whatever. It's what you get in any community. But I do feel that this feeling of the game not being quite enough and not living up to its full potential that I've been feeling for a while, but it's always been a casual game to me, so it wasn't a huge deal. I see this popping up more and more, and I see more and more people who have been cheerleaders for the game for a really long time just losing their enthusiasm. And that sucks, because it's a great game. But this kind of thing is inevitable too, right? You can't make a game for 10 years and knock it out of the park every time. There have been plenty of things that they've tried to do that didn't work out. Diadem is a great example of something that they tried over and over to fix in Heaven's Ward. It was a new type of content. It followed different kinds of formulas. It was more of the old school style of content, and it didn't go well. And then they did Eureka, which was also at the beginning very controversial. A lot of people didn't like it. A lot of people didn't appreciate kind of the older school feel of it. But they improved it, and people ended up reliking it. People are still doing it. And then they have Bozja, which for me is like my favorite content in the game. It's so fun. It feels like an old school MMO, but still keeps a lot of the things about Final Fantasy XIV that makes that game so accessible and easy to play and easy to jump into and jump out of. And it offers a lot of, diverse rewards. There's a lot of reasons to play it, and it feels very lively, right? Because the open world in this game feels pretty empty. I feel like most of the content happens in instances, but Bozja, you feel like you're part of a world. And I think the absence of that kind of content really hurt Endwalker. Like I said, Criterion Dungeons have been universally praised for their dungeon design. People have been asking for harder 4-man content for ages. They don't know how to reward a player for doing stuff that isn't a raid right now. They don't know how to give you anything besides the next most powerful piece of equipment when, they want to limit that to the hardcore raids. So it's a type of content that has kind of immediately died out because while the design of the content is good, the game is so rigid in how it progresses you that they don't really know how to reward you for doing that. They can't give you a piece of equipment that works in a specific way because it's either best in slot or it's not. And because damage is the only thing that matters, that's all you get. So I have high hopes for Dawn Trail. I'm going to play it no matter what. Like, I think it would take a lot more for me to stop playing this game, but it's definitely a fact that I don't play it with the same fervor I used to. I want it to be good. I want this game to succeed. I've met Yoshi P and some of the other developers multiple times, and they've always been super cool and just so willing to listen, and you can tell they care about the game. I think the dumbest thing people can say about the developers for this or any game really is either that they don't care or that they're lazy. I think both those criticisms ignore the way that game development works. I think it ignores the amount of people involved in making something happen, the amount of decisions that are involved that use metrics we don't have any conception of. You know, they have to take a lot of things into account, whereas I can sit here and tell you what I think would be fun, right? But it has to be something that can be developed efficiently, and for the amount of money that's been allocated for it, it has to be something that they can update and push out onto a live server where thousands of people are playing it at all times, and it has to be appreciated by a large enough number of people to make that all have felt worth it. And so, you know, it's easy for me to sit here and say, I think that there should be more crowd control in the game. But they have a bunch of code that determines whether or not that's an easy thing to do. I would much rather do that kind of stuff than AoE down monsters endlessly, but you know, that's what it is. So yeah, that's kind of my view on the frustrations with the current game. And I don't think that it's an unwinnable situation. I think it's perfectly capable of coming back and kind of reigniting that passion in a lot of people that I think has been lost. I know that they can do it. I hope that they will, and that you know, this game continues for a long time. Next time, if you guys want me to make a video about the things I love in this game, because there are a lot of them, let me know, and I can do that, because again, I do love this game. I do want to play it more, but like, something is just missing right now. There's a spark that I feel like the game used to have that it doesn't have now, and part of that is just it's been running for a long time, right? And I think some of the difficulties that they're having right now are a natural consequence of that. I think that there's definitely conscious decisions they can make to add some complexity and add more decision to the game and make it a little more involved on the part of the players. And I hope they do that. But we'll see. Hopefully FanFest goes well, and you know, Dawn Trail will be awesome. Yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this kind of rambly video. I know it was all over the place, but I didn't want to write a script, so I didn't. If you want to like the video and subscribe, that'd be cool. I do want to get back to making MMO content, because I've been in an MMO mood lately. Let me know what kind of stuff you'd like to see, if there are any games you'd like to see. Kind of itching to check out Dragonflight again. I had a lot of fun with that after I finished some of the patch content for FF14. But yeah, thanks for watching, and have a good one. Bye.